I'm joined here by my colleague Heba, and we're going to talk to you this evening about our Valentine's Day webinar. We've got a lot of good ideas for Valentine's Day coming up. It's a good theme to talk to your students about in the classes. Um, as always, you will receive a certificate of participation and a webinar handout in the next few days. Write to me at formazione@MLA World if you don't receive it by Monday. Check your spam; it often ends up there. There will also be a handout, so that will contain all the important information from this webinar. There's some worksheets that you'll see in the webinar itself, and also a lot of useful links for extended activities that you could use. Um, Web, Valentine's Day, sorry, I lost my words there for a moment. Valentine's Day is this Saturday, the 14th. So that I've given you like a week and a bit to do some of these activities beforehand or maybe on the day. And so we thought we'd give you some of these things, and whether you use them on the day itself or these are activities that you could use all through the year as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean you can only do it on that day. But as any visitor to any MLA summer camp has seen, romance is at the top of teenagers' minds, and giving them some language on this subject of love to express themselves in English or maybe to find a English speaking partner will doubtless mean that we grab their attention. Okay. While with some justification, I guess French and Italian are seen as the languages of love. English holds its own, I think, too, with Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Marvin Gaye and Prince, amongst many others, and the novels of Jane Austen or the film Casablanca. Let us know in the chat if you've got any names to add to that, some English speaking romantics, I guess, lowercase romantics, I guess. Have you ever brought up themes of love and romance in your English classes? Let me know. Let us know in the chat, and be nice to share those ideas. Anyway, we always give you some objectives, and by the end of this session, I hope you'll be better able to incorporate themes of love and romance into your English lessons, to plan activities that use love and romance as a motivational tool for students to learn English, to prepare activities which capture your students' imaginations. And as we often do in these sort of webinars, we're going to look a little bit about literature. So hopefully you'll be able to identify and explain some characteristics of love poetry in English. Okay. With that, I'll hand over to my colleague Heather, who's going to talk a little bit about CLIL and the history of Valentine's Day.
Hello, hi everyone. So I want to show a quick little idea for Valentine's Day. If you don't know, CLIL stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. So we teach real content like history through English that naturally broadens the students' vocabulary. So for Valentine's Day, history is an easy fit because students are always curious about where the traditions come from. We'll use a short video and then some comprehension questions, and then we'll open it out into a discussion. This gives us a clear structure, input, check understanding, and then speak. Before we start, quick question for the chat. Has anyone tried CLIL in their classroom before? Maybe a mini history, science, or geography moment in English? Please type yes or not yet.
Yeah, I know we've had a lot of people asking for more webinars on CLIL, so we try to incorporate it into our webinars wherever we can.
Very often, most people are saying yes very often.
Oh, here's a certain thing that I'm sure if you're teaching history, you could incorporate this in. Okay, the next
Okay.
if possible.
So on the slide, we're setting up the key questions that will guide the listening. First, when we celebrate love, why do we celebrate love on the 14th? How long has this been going on? And where does the name actually come from? We're going to watch a short video. And then when you show this video to the students while they're watching, they're going to listen for specific information. And then you can ask them the comprehension questions after that.
2,000 years ago, the most powerful army in the world belonged to the Romans. The Romans were so strong that they conquered almost all of Europe and parts of Asia and Africa. But then they began to grow very rich and a little bit lazy. Life in the army was harsh, and many of the soldiers longed for the comforts of home. They wanted to get married and set up families. The emperor, whose name was Claudius II, grew worried that his army was growing soft, and so he made a law that no soldier was allowed to get married. By that time, many of the Romans were Christians, and one of their leaders was a bishop called Valentine. He believed that if a man and woman fell in love with each other, they should get married, and so he decided to let soldiers get married in his church, even though now it was against the law. The soldiers' weddings were meant to be kept secret, but as you know, all secrets are hard to keep, and soon the word got out. Valentine was arrested and brought before the emperor, who demanded that he stopped helping soldiers to marry, and instead that he pray to the gods of Rome. When he refused, the emperor sentenced him to death. While Valentine was in prison, the jailer's daughter used to bring him his food. She was a young woman who was unfortunately blind. She and Valentine used to spend long hours talking to each other, and soon they fell in love. One day, Valentine put his hand through the bars of the cell and touched the lids of her closed eyes. When she opened them again, she could see. It was a miracle. Valentine's execution was set for the 14th of February. On his last night on earth, he wrote his final message to the girl. He signed his love letter, "From your Valentine." This took place in the year 270, and ever since, lovers have sent each other messages on February the 14th with the same signature. And that's the story.
Yeah, nice little video.
Okay, so who was paying attention to the video? We'll ask you guys a few comprehension questions that you can answer in the chat and later on you can use with your students in class. The first one was, which adjectives were used to describe the Roman army after their successes? Does anyone know? Lazy? Okay. Which secret was too hard to keep? People are still typing. What miracle happened? Valentine's will to marry soldiers, their marriages. Very good. What miracle happened?
Okay, let's move on and
Okay.
getting those in the chat. So keep writing, okay? Remember those, and we'll move on. But Heather will keep responding to things in the chat.
Okay. And this is a worksheet, an extension worksheet that you can use after the video, and it will be available in the handout.
Yeah, it's got a QR code there, so either you can share the video in the class, maybe on your interactive whiteboard or screen. Otherwise, you could give it as homework. The students can use that QR code to pull up that video. And there's a lot more questions, and there are also the answers in the handout as well for you. Okay. Another fun activity that is not just for Valentine's Day, but obviously it's very appropriate to Valentine's Day, is speed dating. This is a formalized matchmaking process, which is the purpose of encouraging eligible singles to meet large numbers of new potential partners in a very short period of time. Okay, this speed dating as a single word is a registered trademark, but as two separate words, it's often used as this generic term for similar events. Okay. So it's a great get to know you activity. So it's a great way of getting students to practice their speaking, their questioning. Okay. And it can really be a good way to get students' imaginations going. So let me give you some ways of planning this. And again, this is all, I've even got a worksheet on this in the handout so you can conduct one of these games. We have a lot of students in our summer classes using this, or a lot of teachers using this with their classes. And it's a really good way to get them speaking, put a bit of pressure on. They have to get a lot of information. And it's a little bit like we looked at recently, the information gap, our webinar on that. This is the same sort of thing. They have to find something else out and use that information. So, first of all, one way of getting students to, maybe be a bit more creative and not be so nervous about it is to create a new personality. So instead of doing it as a real date or, using their real personality, they can invent one. To be creative, they need to think about what they're like, what they do, what interests they have. Do they have any peculiar habits? What ambitions they have? And again, as their avatar, let's say, okay, you want to see if you can elicit, see if anyone knows what speed dating is and what questions they think may be asked in such an event. And then in pairs or threes, they can make 10 possible questions to be asked and take this list with them when they participate in the activity. So these are questions for a partner. Okay. Divide the class into boys or girls, or as you please. You can mix them up anyway, because it doesn't need to be a sort of romantic thing. Usually the girls, if you have gentlemen in the class, then the girls can remain seated and the boys can go around. Maybe 2 minutes per couple, maybe even less if you want, because you want to get this really going and get everyone to talk to everyone. Okay, at least all the boys talk to all the girls. Okay, depending on the size of the class. After each boy has moved around, spoken to each girl. So as you can see in the picture there, it's a good way to sort of line them up in a line, and then everyone takes a step right. Okay, whereas the girls stay in the same, and then the last person comes around to the end where the empty seat is. Okay, after everyone's moved, and they end up sitting back to the person they were with first, so they know that they've gone through. Okay, they can tell the class, or they maybe even put on the sheet of paper who they would like to spend more time with as a friend. Okay, so again, I think it's a good way to do this by take the pressure off students that it's not judgmental. We're not really, finding out who's the most popular or least popular. They get to create a new personality. So whether you can give them real characters or they actually just invent someone with strange habits or great, a millionaire or whatever, things like this. It's a fun, lighthearted activity that is really focused on speaking. So it's a great activity to get your students speaking and can be acting too if they invent this new personality. So again, you can play this in many ways. It can be adapted even not as a sort of date thing. It can be about information. If you have to find out, I don't know, if you're doing food, you can get all the students to ask each student what they had for dinner last night or lunch yesterday, those sort of things. And they go through very quickly and they try to find someone who has the same food tastes as themselves, or you could do it about music or films, things like that. It can be used with a different theme over and over again. So it can be a really fun activity to do. As I said, we've got a handout there so that you can plan this. This is the instructions for you, and you can sort of, it really doesn't take much preparation, maybe just a bit of setting up the classroom, but you can get the students to do that with you. Okay. We always try to incorporate a little literature because I know we get a lot of requests for it. And I think usually around the end of the academic year, a lot of teachers start to get on to Shakespeare. as one of the topics that you're doing as literature. So I thought we'd tackle the Shakespearean sonnet. So although the sonnet derives from poems written in the courts of Frederick II in Palermo in the 13th century, came into English through translations and imitations of Italian poets, famous poets such as Dante and Petrarch. English, in comparison to Italian, is quite rhyme poor. So Italian is very, I don't know if you say easy, but it's easier to make rhymes, whereas in English, no. So the Shakespeare sonnet has fewer couples, so it doesn't need three rhymes, it just needs two. And it generally uses this form A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and then a couplet at the end, G, G. Okay. Was brought into English by the Earl of Surrey from the Italian. Well, that form was based on the Petrarchan sonnets, but the rhyme scheme slightly different. Okay. Another characteristic element of the Shakespearean sonnet is its use of iambic pentameter. Okay, this is the most popular rhythm in English poetry. Popularized before Shakespeare in Chaucer in the 14th century, it consists of a 10-syllable line divided into alternate weak and strong syllables. So those are weak and strong syllable, a weak syllable followed by a strong syllable is called an iamb. And because there's 5 of those, it's pentameter, so 5 meter. Okay, so in the total, it ends up as 10 syllables. So here we have an example from one of the poems we're going to look at. Here's a perfect iambic pentameter line, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see. So we have this da 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 rhythm, okay, which sort of is quite, while it has a distinct rhythm, it's not overly strong. It sort of matches spoken English, so it doesn't. Shakespeare's poems, but also a lot of his plays are written in this, not necessarily always regular. In fact, Shakespeare was not a stickler for this form, so he's not afraid to add syllables or invert the rhythm when he wants to. In fact, the strength of this is that it mimics this speech while having a regularity that stops it becoming just prose. It also sort of can mimic this speech. And in his plays, it's generally unrhymed as what's known as blank verse. And the iambic line is all throughout English poetry, even to the present. So all the greatest English poets have generally used blank verse. Iambic pentameter, whether it's rhymed or unrhymed, known as blank verse. Okay. So we're going to have a look at 2 of Shakespeare's most famous sonnets, and they can sort of contrast to show ways that he uses metaphors and similes in a way that few, if any, other English poets can match. First, let's look at Sonnet 18. Excuse me a second. That is one of the series that's traditionally assumed to be addressed to a fair youth. There's a lot of debate about who this might be, but the poet seems fascinated by his beauty, at times urging him to procreate in order to pass on his beauty, as you will see here. And then in other times, he seems to claim that while bodily beauty is mortal, immortality may be achieved in prayer. This is the thing that he repeats again and again in the sonnets. So I'll read this. I'm not a great reader of Shakespeare, so you have to bear with me here. Okay. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declined, and by chance on nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So one of the great strengths of this poem is its real delight in its own form. Okay, it uses the tradition of Petrarchan sonnets. in this tradition, they have these elaborate metaphors and similes to describe a loved one's beauty. Okay, here, strangely, the poet's searching for these similes, but finds each one wanting, that is not matching what he needs. Okay, so all of them are sort of negative comparisons. Okay, I can't compare, or I try to compare you to a summer's day, but you're different. Okay, you're better. Okay. Um, Summer can be marred by winds, heat, or clouds, and it's transient, going from autumn into winter. Okay. Most of his sonnets contain what's known as the volta. Okay. We use a lot of Italian terms in English literature, obviously, particularly when we have talking about a sonnet which comes from Italian. Okay. And this is where the tone of the poem changes. Okay. In Sonnet 18, it comes quite early at the beginning of the third quatrain. So after we have the 8 lines. Okay. So when the poet introduces the theme of immortality, ironically, the poet can't claim immortality for the youth's beauty in itself, but only through the sonnet. Okay. The sonnet's about how the youth's beauty will outlast the summer's stay only by being captured in the lines of this very poem that we're reading. Okay, so the couplet informs the readers that by the very fact we're reading the poem, this youth, the beauty, has become immortal. Okay. Um, One way that Shakespeare plays with these conventions of the sonnets may be shown in another one, 130. Okay, this is often described as being addressed to the dark lady of the sonnet. Uh, so here we have, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snows be white, well then her breasts are done. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damask, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she, belied with false compare. So here we have Shakespeare's most iconoclastic, challenging the conventions of his own sonnets, or the stereotypical Elizabethan sonnet, or in fact Italian sonnet. And he's almost misogynistic here. Some people actually say he is. Instead of searching for metaphors and coming up short, as in Sonnet 8, excuse me, here he negates the traditional similes of the sun, coral, snow, roses, perfume, music, and goddesses. So he comes up with these metaphors, okay, and then says that he doesn't see these similarities. Okay, he does see a couple of similarities, but they're again quite negative. He says his lover's hair is like black wires, and while that might not seem so strange to us now, the wire in these times, before electricity, obviously, referred to gold chains or hair nets. So a black wire would be something that would normally be gold, is now black. Okay. So he's talking about golden hair now, saying that she's got black hair, so it's not like gold. Okay. The volta here comes at the beginning of the couplet, so quite late here. However, there's a little bit of a shift which prepares us for it. Rather than the notes of disgust we find in the first 2 quatrains, the third admits that while her voice may not be music, he still loves to hear her speak, and while she doesn't float like a goddess, that is, I've never seen a goddess go, she walks on the ground. Okay, she's literally down to earth. Okay, so in this way, this sort of couplet has this sort of magic. It's sort of like a paradox. The poet insists that his love is as rare as, or maybe rarer than, any other lover who's compared falsely to such negative things. So, when, for example, Shakespeare in the previous one we looked at says how much better his lover is to nature, here he's sort of saying, look, I know she's not as good as all these things, or her breath is, but he's saying that, the fact that I love her, even though I can admit she's a real woman, okay, is what means that my love is really true. Okay. So he's praising the real person, not this sort of false exaggeration. Okay. Anyway, coming to the conclusion, whether it's dating games, listening exercises, or literature, this theme of love and romance is a great topic to add something extra to your classes this time of the year or any time of the year, I think. Okay. Why not ask students to write a sonnet of their own, okay, or find an English translation of a famous love poem by Dante or Petrarch? Okay, could your students do a better translation from the ones they found? So again, this can be fun, given that we're talking about love poetry, at least in the Western tradition, generally comes from Italian sources. Maybe they can have a look at how the English translations compare, or their own translations could be a fun way to do it too. Um, there's also quite a fun Valentine's Day poem that we do in English. Okay, we have this roses are red, violets are blue. Here we have an example, sugar is sweet, and so are you. In general, you replace the third and sometimes even the fourth line. Okay. It can be romantic, such as the example above, or for example, things like onions stink, and so do you. Okay. So it can be sort of ironic or joking around. So you just need to change that third line and maybe the fourth line too. You can see some examples on the page here. This could be a fun thing to get students writing. They're quite simple poems, and they are also a very common meme or things that you see a lot on the internet, in films, in songs, things like that. So it can be a really fun thing to do there. Okay. Would students like to play their most romantic song and talk about it? So we've looked at music in the class, and I think we're going to be repeating that webinar again soon. So something like talking about what you like about a song, maybe looking at the lyrics, and other things too, their favorite romantic film, romantic TV series or book. They could talk about that. These all can be great ideas for getting students talking about these sort of themes and expanding their vocabulary of, love, romance, Valentine's Day, things like that. Anyway, that brings us to the end. So we have a lot of ideas for future webinars, but please pop in the chat or you can email me some ideas for future sessions and we'll see what we can do about planning those into them. Anyway, thanks a lot for your attention. Thanks to you, Heather, for joining me. And everyone will receive a certificate of participation by email soon, and you'll get the handout as well. So if that doesn't arrive in your inbox, check your spam on Monday. If it's not there, then write to me and I'll get that out to you as soon as possible. As I said, we have a handout with all this information and a lot more in there too. Join us next week. We've got a webinar with a special guest, Dr. Roberta Tardi. She's always very popular. So I hope you can join us in that webinar next week. We'll be reaching out to you with more details about that soon. Thanks again, Heather, and thanks
Most
to
welcome.
participants. Okay. Goodbye and happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Bye bye bye.
Bye.